The following is an analysis of Mozart's aria Der Hölle Rache from his opera Die Zauberflöte, commonly known in English as the Magic Flute. The format is specifically designed for students who are preparing for the essay-style question in the A-level music exam. This is a typical A-level question. Der Hölle Rache, Hell's Revenge, is an aria from Mozart's opera Die Zauberflöte, the Magic Flute, composed in 1791. It was carefully written to portray the Queen of the Night as the villain and the opponent of Sarastro, who is the leader of the Temple of the Sun. What techniques does Mozart use to depict the rage and the unstable character of the Queen? Normally, a score, audio recording, and translation of the text will be included in the exam. You will be asked to write a short essay which should draw attention to any points of interest in the music, but with specific focus on the following: the relationship between text, tonality, and harmony, the use of instrumentation and orchestration to support the libretto, and any features of the music that are typical of Mozart's style. Crucially, the points you make in your commentary should be illustrated by detailed reference to the score. Now let's focus on the relationship between text, tonality, and harmony. The text, which is in German, exemplifies a transition away from the Italian-dominated opera of the Baroque period. The Magic Flute is an example of German comic opera, and a good example of 18th century Singspiel, a mixture of dialogue and singing. But this aria reflects a more sophisticated and multi-layered approach, deliberately borrowing ideas from Baroque opera seria to insert a mood of gravitas and the notion of old-fashioned values within the subtext. The aria is preceded by spoken dialogue, a characteristic of Singspiel and a marked difference from the tradition of recitative followed by aria. This aria is an example of aria di bravura, a dramatic aria specifically composed to demonstrate the virtuosic skill of the singer. The text reveals the Queen of the Night's full anger and a desire for vengeance, which can only be appeased by forcing her daughter, Pamina, to kill her nemesis, Sarastro. Let's look at the elements of music to see how Mozart enhances the text. The tonality of the aria is D minor. Incidentally, the choice of key for many classical composers was a careful and sometimes meaningful decision. Musicologist Christian Schubart argued that D minor was commonly used by classical composers to represent melancholy, bad temper, and womanliness. Of course, this is not scientific, but it does give an insight into the shared cultural experiences in the 18th century. The texture of the aria is homophonic. It has a clear melody in the treble register, supported by harmonic accompaniment. Typically, Mozart's harmonic accompaniment is artistically refined, with contrasting ideas and occasionally polyphonically decorated with countermelodies and imitation. Now let's look at the orchestral score. The aria starts with a fast, dramatic two-bar introduction, marked allegro assai. Notice the first inversion D minor chord articulated with bow tremolo in low strings. This creates a sense of nervousness and agitation. The strings appear to be shaking with anger, and the mood of expectation is enhanced with a tonic pedal point in bars 3 and 4. Students should take note of the sudden dynamic changes, which become an important feature in this aria. The abrupt changes in volume perfectly echo the emotional outburst. Mozart increases the sense of tension by building the melody in bars 6 to 8 on a rising scale from D to B flat. The word Tod, meaning death, being dramatically expressed by the use of a Neapolitan sixth chord in bars 7 and 9. Importantly, this is a remote chromatic chord substitution in the key of D minor, which adds an exciting and unpredictable quality to the harmonic progression, thus reflecting the unstable emotions of the Queen. The Neapolitan sixth chord is a flattened supertonic in first inversion. The rising melodic line has a chromatic quality, suggesting a G harmonic minor scale, and further echoes a sense of rising anger in the text. The translation, death and destruction wildly flame around. The phrase is concluded with a G-sharp diminished seventh chord, which leads to A major, the dominant key, in bar 10. Importantly, diminished seventh chords were frequently used by classical composers as a colourful substitution of a secondary dominant seventh chord. For example, an E dominant seventh chord resolving to A major can be substituted with a G-sharp diminished seventh chord. This is an effective way of creating harmonic interest and tension, and particularly common in minor keys. Furthermore, notice the chromatic nature of the bass line, which increases the unsettled feeling. In bar 10, the music quickly modulates to F major, the relative major. The mention of Sarastro, the priest of the sun, appears to bring a more positive, less chromatic tonality, illustrated by the first violins. Notice the simple triadic patterns and the sequential development. Also, the harmony is more stable and diatonic, supported by a 4-bar tonic pedal. Students may notice the name Sarastro is expressed with a conjunct, stepwise diatonic scale, which is in contrast with the Queen's more chromatic disjunct melody in the opening 8 bars. It could be argued that Mozart is subtly reinforcing a contrast between the dark mood of the Queen and the lighter values of Sarastro, who is, after all, the priest of the sun. Incidentally, in the following aria, Sarastro sings about forgiveness and brotherhood, deliberately contrasting the attitude of the Queen. In bars 17 to 20, the Queen threatens to abandon her daughter if she does not kill Sarastro. She sings, "Then as my child I shall know you nevermore." This intense passage is heightened with a descending chromatic melodic line leading to a B diminished seventh chord and a transient modulation to C major, which is the dominant chord of the relative major. Once again, Mozart uses a diminished seventh chord to create harmonic interest. In bar 20, the C major chord is decorated with a chromatic lower auxiliary note, B natural, played by the low strings in unison. Students may notice the use of the dotted rhythm within the Queen's melody, for example in bar 23. It could be argued that the inclusion of a strong dotted rhythm gives the music a fanfare quality and is perhaps reminiscent of the Royal French Overture. In bars 24 to 43, the word nimmermehr, meaning nevermore, is extended by melisma, with a spectacular display of virtuosic coloratura writing. Notice the melodic decoration, the use of the acciaccatura, the anacrusis turn, followed by a dramatic staccato repetition of top C, which is sequentially developed. eventually leading to a stratospheric F major arpeggio peaking with high F. This passage is supported by a repeated plagal cadence. The level of difficulty displayed in this famous passage epitomizes the spirit of aria di bravura, aria of bravery. Candidates could gain extra credit by drawing parallels between this extreme vocal range, called high tessitura, and the extreme emotional state of the Queen of the Night. The fast repetition of notes could suggest the nagging and scolding quality of the domineering mother. Furthermore, the virtuosic writing also reinforces the Queen's supernatural and demonic role within the opera. In bars 43 to 45, we have a return of the rising chromaticism articulated with energetic quavers. Notice the rhythmic diminution of the dotted rhythm in the woodwind in bar 46. Again, there is a fanfare quality to the music, which enhances the perfect cadence in the relative major in bar 47. Now the orchestra takes over with a churning and vigorous passage, containing semiquaver scale it runs in the violins, immediately followed by a strong descending figure in octaves in bar 49. The resolute nature of the text is echoed in the repeated perfect cadence. This passage is a typical example of classical tonic prolongation, which concludes this section of the aria. From bars 53 to 67, Mozart develops the dotted rhythm and restricts the vocal melody to a forceful repetition of the note F. This is deliberately done to emphasize the Queen's cold and unforgiving words. She sings, "Abandoned be forever, forsaken be forever, and shattered be forever." The repetition of the word ewig, forever, is stressed by the firm descending octave. Also, the mood of agitation is once again heightened with bow tremolo in the first violins, which have an inverted pedal. Interestingly, the static nature of the vocal line is contrasted with a counter melody flourish, harmonized in thirds. Once again, students should recognize that the Queen's volatile temperament is echoed with abrupt dynamic changes, reminiscent of Baroque terrace dynamics. The prolongation of the F major tonality is suddenly disturbed in bar 59 with a chromatic step upwards to an F-sharp diminished seventh chord. This functions as a leading note chord to the new key of G minor. In bar 61, Mozart increases the tension by repeating the dramatic descending octave in the vocal line, but now a tone higher, ending with yet another chromatic step upwards to a G-sharp diminished seventh chord in bar 65. This is the leading note chord to A major, which smoothly brings us back to the dominant key of D minor in bar 67. Fundamentally, the music in bars 51 to 67 is based on an extended five-note chromatic scale, starting on F and rising to A. Once more, this illustrates a deep connection between the unstable character of the Queen and the harmony. In bars 69 to 73, we have more coloratura decoration. The Queen quietly sings an extended triplet figure with upper auxiliary notes, which weaves over a prolonged dominant pedal. The words alla banda di natura, all the bonds of nature, is metaphorically spun out like a connected thread. The Queen appears to be casting an ominous spell over her daughter. The bewitching quality of the passage is enhanced with the alternation between the notes from the D harmonic minor and melodic minor scale. This is a good example of Mozart creatively evoking the subtext. Extending the word bond is a subtle example of word painting. In bar 73, Mozart repeats the staccato broken chord motif from bar 30, but now transposed into the darker key of D minor. This motif is then passed between the first violins and the soprano, a device called imitation. The motif is then extended with a descending sequence supported by the flute. Incidentally, the intricate texture displayed in this passage is a good example of polyphonically animated homophony. The sequence moves downwards until it lands on the note E flat in bar 80. This chromatic note is then harmonized with yet another emotionally charged Neapolitan sixth chord. The harmonic surprise is further intensified with a chromatic shift upwards to a G sharp diminished seventh, which again acts as a leading note chord to A major, the dominant. Now let's return to the orchestral score. We now move into the final section of the aria. In bar 82, the Queen demands that her daughter kills Sarastro. Her words are dramatically answered by a forte orchestral tutti. This antiphonal exchange between the solo soprano and the aggressive orchestral block chords could imply the fatal stabs. Without doubt, it is an intense section and perhaps more reminiscent of opera seria rather than the light-hearted opera buffa. The final text about Sarastro's death is given full focus by an unaccompanied monophonic texture. The Queen sings a descending dominant seventh arpeggio in bar 85, the gravity of which is reinforced by the strings, which imitate the descending pattern in bar 86. Falling onto a dominant seventh chord in first inversion in bar 87. Importantly, Mozart increases the tension created by the dominant seventh chord by inserting a general pause. This creative use of silence is another powerful way of building expectation before the coda. Mozart ends this dramatic aria with a declamatory passage in the style of a recitative. The Queen shouts out a warning to Parmina. She says, "Hark, gods of vengeance, hear a mother's vow." It is worth analysing the ways Mozart musically paints these final words. Students should appreciate the strong sense of theatre in this coda. When the unaccompanied soprano sings hark, it is immediately answered by a full orchestral punctuation, decorated with 3 grace notes. This is repeated 3 times, each rendition rising higher up the tonic triad. The note D is then followed by the note F, which sets up an expectation for the note A, which would complete the tonic minor triad. However, Mozart deliberately overshoots the expected note and lands on a high B flat instead. This is then used as an inverted pedal. Typically, the note B flat would be harmonized with chord 4 However, the drama continues with an unexpected modulation to E-flat major, the key of the Neapolitan chord. In this simplified score, we can see the B-flat 7th chord in third inversion, which acts as a dominant to the following E-flat major chord, the Neapolitan 6th. Fundamentally, this passage is a rapid 5-to-1 cadence in E-flat major, repeated 3 times. After the brief modulation to E-flat, Mozart increases the tension by moving to a C-sharp diminished 7th chord in second inversion, which moves chromatically up to G-sharp diminished 7th, the leading note chord, to the dominant key, A major. The final words, "Hear a mother's vow," are given full attention with a monophonic texture. This ominous aria is concluded with a tutti orchestral passage, with a chromatic melody ascending to the expected note A, and finally resolving with a resolute and determined perfect cadence. The score ends with a theatrical performance direction for Pamina. Sie versinkt, she sinks, reflecting the exhaustion from her mother's emotional outburst. When analyzing the harmony within this aria, students should make a connection between Mozart's use of chromaticism and the late classical style of Sturm und Drang, storm and stress, which foreshadowed the harmonic complexity and heightened emotions associated with Romanticism. Now let's turn our attention to other musical elements which support the analysis. As mentioned earlier, the recurring harmonic surprises are enhanced with the use of abrupt changes in dynamics. This adds to the ebb and flow of musical intensity, which further reflects the Queen's unstable mood. The melody, such as the choice of intervals and rhythm, contain many symbols of strength and restless emotion. For example, the opening 6 bars reflects a strong and determined attitude, reinforced by the recurring perfect 4th and 5th intervals, the dominant and tonic. This is skillfully contrasted with the use of chromaticism, for instance in bars 7 and 9, which evokes a feeling of agitation and restlessness. The structure of the aria could be understood as follows. Credit should be given for recognizing the inventive melodic ideas and the through-composed quality of the writing. The frequent change of melodic material supports the frantic emotional text. Importantly, the opening melodic ideas in bars 1 to 24 are not repeated. Instead, Mozart develops new ideas, perhaps showing the importance of word painting rather than a simple repetitive formula. Students could contrast this intense aria with aria number 2 from Act 1, which is a typical singspiel aria in strophic form, sung by the birdcatcher Papageno. I will now briefly examine the instrumentation and wider historical context. This aria is scored for a relatively large classical orchestra, with 2 flutes, 2 oboes, 2 bassoons, 2 horns in F, 2 trumpets in D, 2 timpani, and the usual strings. Notice the lack of clarinets, which has not yet become a standard orchestral instrument. As was customary, the timpani would be pre-tuned to the tonic and dominant notes. As we have seen, Mozart makes effective use of orchestration to heighten the feeling of agitation. Notice the bow tremolo and the insistent staccato quaver articulation in the strings. He also shows sensitivity to the overall balance of the orchestra, Notice how the soprano line tends to be supported by the first violins. The score also demonstrates the development of orchestration in the classical period by treating the cello and bass as separate instruments. Students may notice the cello part in high register in the coloratura section, bars 24 to 32, without a double bass instrument. This gives a lighter color to the texture. The sensitivity is further illustrated in bars 29 to 31. Mozart carefully supports the high tessitura arpeggios with a reduced, delicate woodwind group, just flutes and oboes. Furthermore, unlike Baroque scores, this aria shows a greater control of dynamics, including crescendos and detailed articulation markings such as staccato and slurs. Mozart's attention to detail can be seen in bar 91, where he writes fingering above the semiquaver violin passage, sopra una corda. Also notice the timpani roll in bar 97, which adds energy to the final cadence. Students may mention the use of triple stops in the first and second violins in the penultimate bar. This adds gravity and power to the final dominant chord. Now let's look at the wider historical context of the aria and Mozart's mature style. The following is a list of topics for further research. Der Hölle Rache, Hell's Revenge, demonstrates Mozart's mature skill in creating a compelling score which fully expresses the vengeful inner psychology of the Queen of the Night. To support this characterization, he deliberately borrows ideas from traditional Italian opera seria and Neapolitan opera, such as the dramatic and decorative aria di bravura style. Furthermore, the highly virtuosic coloratura passage, the abrupt terrace dynamics, the recurring use of diminished seventh and Neapolitan chord substitutions are musical devices he uses to intensify the dramatic situation occurring on stage. Mozart intentionally portrays the Queen of the Night as a dangerous force within the opera, whose character is supposed to symbolize old and irrational traditions. In this regard, it is important to recognize the influence of the Enlightenment and Masonic philosophy when analyzing this aria. The Enlightenment was an intellectual movement that developed throughout the 18th century and was characterized by a growing fascination with science, reason, human happiness, and a critical evaluation of religious authority and traditional values. The Queen of the Night is considered by some scholars to represent anti-Enlightenment qualities, such as being emotionally unstable, superstitious, and a symbol of old-fashioned monarchy. Students should also consider the influence of 18th century Freemasons when evaluating the role of the Queen of the Night and Sarastro. Many of the creative figures behind the magic flute were Freemasons, including Mozart and the librettist Emanuel Schikaneder. The allegorical libretto is full of Masonic symbolism, such as the recurring number 3, the mysterious esoteric subplots, the antagonistic duality between light and darkness, and the central theme of challenging old authorities. In this respect, the Queen of the Night plays a crucial role within the opera. She is a dark counterpoint to the wise and noble Sarastro. The Magic Flute was premiered on the 30th of September 1791, 3 months before Mozart's death. The opera not only demonstrates his compositional mastery, but epitomizes the aesthetics of the late classical period. Although the aria is full of dramatic emotion, the balanced melodic phrasing is typical of the classical period and Mozart's style. This is exemplified by the opening 8-bar melody, which is constructed by 2 equal 4-bar phrases, with a logical question and answer structure, sometimes described as antecedent and consequence, or periodic phrasing. This aria further illustrates the aesthetics of the late classical period, which saw a greater interest in textural and emotional contrast, within a single piece of music. As we have seen, there is a great deal of drama, tension, and virtuosity in this music. Although this music is inventive and contains some contrapuntal writing, it is always governed by a homophonic conception of texture. The use of chromaticism is functional and used to create tension within a classical goal-orientated language. Finally, the opera was written at a time of social transition in Europe. Composed shortly after the French Revolution, in an atmosphere of political change, Mozart's late operas contain a subtle commentary on class structure and authority. Moreover, unlike many previous composers who relied on the church or aristocracy for patronage, he was a freelance artist, writing for the growing bourgeoisie and middle-class audience. The emergence of the popular and accessible Singspiel style was a reflection of the changing tastes of his new audience. Der Hölle Rache is still regarded as one of the most dramatic and challenging showpieces in the opera repertoire. Students are encouraged to memorize the specific terminology which is highlighted in my analysis, particularly those related to the elements of music. Also, try to connect your objective musical statements, such as in bar 7 Mozart uses a Neapolitan sixth chord, with an attempt to explain why the composer has done this. For example, Mozart uses a Neapolitan sixth chord in bar 7 to intensify the emotion of the word death. This chromatic substitution is characteristic of Mozart's mature style, and perhaps foreshadows the aesthetic of the pre-Romantic movement called Sturm und Drang. And remember, the points you make in your essay should be illustrated with detailed reference to the score. Good luck! 祝你好运!